Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that encourages good discussion in our community on today's local and global issues. Now, your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, author, professor, and nationally known sports economist, Dr. Kevin Quinn.
Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College. I'm Kevin Quinn. Our special guest is St. Norbert College Vice President and Chief Information Officer Rae Clemmons, and we'll discuss technology in the 21st century, in particular in higher education. Clemmons came to St. Norbert College in 2012 from Menlo College in Atherton, California, where she was CIO. Clemmons leads the college-wide information technology programs and has overall responsibility for implementation of critical enhancements and initiatives in IT. An area of focus for Clemmons is enhancing the role technology plays in support of teaching and learning at St. Norbert College. Rae, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the first thing I want to ask you is, what is your job? What does a CIO do at a college like St. Norbert?
Well, it's a pretty interesting role, actually. The job really entails thinking about everything from sort of base infrastructure all the way out to strategy about where higher education and our institutions should go with relation to technology. So on any given day, I'm doing a lot of things. I'm looking at wiring networking plans, and then I'm talking about strategic initiatives that could be 2, 3, 10 years out for the college in relation to technology.
Yeah, some of our buildings and infrastructure weren't built in the Wi-Fi era, so right. I would imagine that's a challenge. What are some of the other challenges that you and folks that do what you do face on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think on a day-to-day basis, it's just how rapidly technology changes. So it's keeping up with, it's just keeping up with the changes of technology and the demands on technology. So 10 years ago, Wi-Fi didn't really even exist. And 5 years ago, you might have a couple of access points. And now students and faculty come with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 connected devices, and all of those are attaching to the network. And just around the corner are things like Google Glass, so you'll have a connected glass. Samsung has a watch out now that connects. So we can expect that there's just this huge demand on resources, and being able to continually ratchet up the amount of infrastructure that you need to support that demand is a big challenge.
About 10 or 15 years ago, I was on a committee that was looking at building the campus center from the old Van Dyke Hall.
Yep.
And we were talking at the time about where we were going to put the computer lab. And then we decided that we were going to be very forward-looking and realize that, students will just plug in to the wall. I mean, Wi-Fi was just not even heard of then.
Right.
And that's the difficulty, when you think about the infrastructure that we have at a place like this or other schools like us. I mean, the expectation is that we're going to take 100-year-old beautiful buildings and try to figure out a way to snake all the wires and tubes in there that we need to that we need to do in order to get the technology working.
Yeah, and it's a real challenge. I mean, we actually have some beautiful buildings on this campus that are newer, but even still, we're sitting in the library right now, and it was built in 2009, before I got here, but around that time frame, and it has a huge wired infrastructure. And I'd be willing to bet there's no more than a half a dozen wired ports that are plugged into any single day in here. It's all wireless. So even in the course of 5 years, there's a huge change in that infrastructure. But when you have older buildings, brick buildings, cement buildings, things like that, trying to get the wiring in there is definitely a challenge.
Yeah, and we have a new science building that's going to be opening up, the first phase of it. And I know that the folks who have been doing the planning there have been trying to think forward, and what will a classroom look like at the midpoint of the life of this building, which may be 40, 50 years from now.
Gosh, so I wish I knew that, because I'd be really rich. I think that the classrooms in the future are going to be incredibly robust and flexible. We still are we're sort of nearing the end of this time period where we viewed technology as an overlay. So we would take a classroom, it would sort of look like it did 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 years ago even, and we kind of slapped technology on top. We put a projector in, and we would call it technology enabled, and that's today still that's a pretty good standard, but we're nearing the end of that, and it's really much more of an immersive experience now. And so I think classrooms will be more embedded, where technology is just such an intrinsic part of the fabric, in the same way that ceilings and floors and carpet and electricity are part of the fabric, that it won't be, this is technology enabled. It will just be that technology is part of the teaching and learning experience. The furniture will be embedded potentially with technology, or it will be embedded with the access so that people can plug their devices in right there on the spot. So I think that's a bit of where we're headed. But with regard to the GMS, the science building, just to give you perspective, that building, prior to us going into construction, had about a half a dozen to a dozen wireless access points in it. When we come out of construction, when it's done, it will have 100 wireless access points in it. So that gives you a sense of how much the infrastructure needs have increased to support 21st century computing.
If you're running a business, I mean, you have your enterprise software, and that's pretty much the big deal.
Yeah.
If you're in a college, you're trying to support all this other stuff, and you're trying to teach students,
Yep.
and you have to have the most up-to-date stuff, because otherwise, you're not doing well by your students.
Right,
so
exactly.
How do you handle that?
Very carefully, not always well. It is a challenge because we have the whole, we're very much like a corporation in the fact that we have, or a business in the fact that we have the whole infrastructure side, we have the whole, sort of employee side that we have to accommodate. And then we have this whole other side that no other business has, which is the academic side. And keeping on top of all the academic technologies, and you said, not just the tools that support the classrooms, but the tools that support students in their academic disciplines. So software like SPSS and Mathematica, which are discipline-specific software that our students will go out into the workforce and have to use. So it is a big challenge, and it's a lot of fun. I think it's what I love about being in higher ed IT is that there's just so much to know. It never gets boring.
I agree with you. I mean, one of the things that we're talking about here is maybe revamping our writing program here.
Right.
And we just had somebody on campus to talk about that. And does writing even matter anymore? I mean, of course we believe it does, but what does writing mean in this world where you're not putting a letter together, putting it in an envelope, putting it in a stamp on it, and mailing it off? It's a very different thing.
Well, it is, but it's so critically important because we know that employers, one of the things that they're not getting from students, they're not getting from their employees, are some of these really core skills like critical thinking skills and writing skills. Somebody who can communicate effectively. So the process, the understanding of writing is important. On the other hand, I would say that it's not just writing the academic paper or even writing the business communication anymore. It's writing the academic paper, writing the persuasive, argument to sell a project, writing the business paper, writing for social media, writing for corporate communications. There's so many different forms of writing now that students need to know as they go into the workforce because there's so many different places that we can represent ourselves, and how we do that is really important. So understanding the impact of technology in writing is really important. And then the other thing that I would say is it's not writing, I'm left-handed, so it's not writing like this, it's writing like this, right? Understanding how you write into a computer or voice into a computer, that process. So I think the core skill is important, but it's much more expanded now.
Yeah, I know as a professor here, when I get an email that looks like a text from a student, first of all, I need to hire an Egyptologist to help me figure out what they actually are trying to say. But also, helping young people understand that just because you're thinking that, and people who think like you in your peer group would understand it, doesn't mean everybody understands it, and being able to communicate that. Now, you're quite an active participant in social media.
I am.
You are a tweeter par excellence.
Oh, well, I don't know about that, but thank you.
And you actually were recently recognized for that, right?
I was actually. I was recognized actually twice. The Huffington Post had a list of the top 50, I'm not sure exactly, CIO tweeters in general, and then 20 sort of rising stars. And this was across all industries, so I was a rising star on that list. And then they published a list of the top 50 CIO active users on Twitter in higher education, and I was, I want to say about 12 So somewhere relatively high on that list. It was
pretty
pretty
impressive.
ranked. Well, thank you.
Is the key to a good tweet a really awesome cat video, or is it?
No, I think that's Facebook. No, for me, I use it a lot actually at conferences. So I just came back from a conference, and that tends to be a lot of where I tweet. And it's believe it or not, it's my form of note taking. So I sort of take a summary of what I've just, some idea or concept, and I put it out there in 140 characters. And one, I'm sort of preserving it for myself so that I can go back, and then I'm also sharing that insight or that information with other people at the same time. So I don't take notes anymore at conferences. I tweet them.
10 years ago we had MySpace, right?
Yeah.
It's
I
sort of
vaguely remember that.
The pioneer of that, which
Yeah.
I remember, trying to look at that, and it just hurt my eyes, at all the stuff they did. And then Facebook,
Right.
there, and now Twitter. What's next?
Well, again, if I knew the answer to that question, I'd probably be out there building it. We've got Facebook and Twitter, which are still quite popular, but there's Instagram, there's Snapchat, which are these sort of micro instances that folks grab. There's Pinterest. There's just so many different forms of social media and social engagement. And I don't know what's next. I think, we find that Twitter started out as kind of the 30, 40 something crowd, and now a lot of our students are on Twitter. A couple of years ago, we were asking faculty to start tweeting, and people were saying, 18 to 22-year-olds aren't on Twitter. Well, they are in pretty huge force. They're starting to leave Facebook because they're viewing it now as an old person's tool.
The way to contact grandma, right?
Right, exactly. So so they're coming up through some other forms like this Snapchat thing and other things like that. I don't know what's coming next, but I think the whole idea of social engagement, the idea that technology can connect us, because we view technology in so many ways as disconnecting us, right? I don't have to talk to you because I'm just going to sit here and text. I mean, we could just have this whole conversation by text, and that would be very 21st century, right?
My thumbs would be sore.
Yeah. But and so it does that. So there's definitely some aspect of that where technology disengages us, but it also connects us in ways that were never really possible before.
Yeah, one of the things guilty pleasure I have, I don't know if it's a pleasure, but whenever I have too much faith in humanity, I'll go to Craigslist rant and raves.
Ouch.
And just the unfiltered, nasty things that people say there are pretty amazing. Now, obviously, they're thinking them, but in a different kind of environment, they would choose not to share that.
Yeah.
Hopefully, they would choose not to share that. But like I say, I don't go there very often because there's only so much I can handle of that. But it's a different way, and I think for younger people who are still trying to work all that stuff out, all the social relationships out, I don't think they realize how hurtful they can be when a group of kids kind of pick on another group of kids.
Yeah, there's the whole big thing about cyberbullying now, and I think it's really incumbent upon us as institutions, and this is actually one of the goals that we've written into our IT strategic plan, although it's not really entirely our role, but this idea of building both a community of empowered technology users, so people who understand and are empowered to use technology, as well as responsible digital citizens. And I think that second part is so critically important because it is tremendously powerful, and as such we wield a lot of power using it. And you're right, there are things that I would never say to your face that people somehow feel very comfortable saying in this sort of more anonymous environment, and not realizing the danger and damage to other people, as well as in some cases to themselves. People have gotten fired over some of the things that they've said on social media about their employers or about their colleagues or things like that. So I think, when we think about 21st century competencies for students, writing's really important, communication skills are really important, but there's this aspect of, communicating and writing in a digital environment, and what are the responsibilities? How do you behave responsibly in that type of environment that I think is really critically important for us to consider as a liberal arts institution?
Yeah, I agree, and I know that we've been struggling, and other places like us have been struggling with that. In a sense, it's really in our wheelhouse, because ever since we've been around, we've been about taking young people where they are when they get here, right, and making them ready to be more productive members of society than they otherwise would be. That's what a liberal arts education is all about, right? Preparing people to be free people.
Right, and even more so for St. Norbert, because there's an additional sort of value-based or ethics-based component to that. So I think it's even more in our wheelhouse because of who we are as an institution.
What are some of the other ethical issues that you think young people have to grapple with that maybe they don't quite understand as much as we'd like them to?
Well, I think I think the big one is just behaviorally the bullying and things like that on technology. Also, this whole idea about security and privacy in a technology-enabled environment. We don't get the sense that young people have the same sort of guardedness maybe that we do.
Boundaries,
boundaries,
I guess I would
right?
say.
Yeah, that those of us who are slightly older have. And in some ways that's very good, actually. In some ways, you sort of appreciate that that they're not guarded and are much more freer with information. But there are so many other potential downsides to doing that. If you think about Facebook and some of the questions that Facebook asks you, so. It asks you all your relatives. It asks you your birth city or your hometown. It asks you what high school you went to. Of course, if you're posting, you're probably posting pictures of pets and things like that. If you think about those types of things, you could get mother's maiden name, birthplace, high school. These are all security questions for most people's accounts. So understanding, what you're putting out there, in what context, to whom, is a big issue that I think we need our students to understand.
I agree with that, and just the whole idea of understanding what are the boundaries, because there is such thing as too much information, and one of the things I think that employers are struggling with is, okay, how much do I really want to know about my employees? I mean, it varies, right? Some employers they want to make sure that they got everyone locked down.
Absolutely.
Others don't ask, don't tell.
Right.
And it seems to me that the direction things are moving in is more the latter than the former. A lot of states, for example, have passed laws saying you can't ask for somebody's Facebook password. I guess I can understand.
Which is sort of ludicrous that we had to pass a law about that.
Yeah,
it seems like common sense.
I wouldn't want to know that much about my employees, to be honest with you. Well, let's talk a little bit about your own background. You spent a lot of time in San Francisco. I think you grew up there, if I'm not mistaken.
In the Bay Area, not San Francisco proper, but in the Bay Area. Yeah.
Well, here, when we talk about the Bay Area, it's, the Green Bay Area. But you worked at Menlo College and Cal State East Bay.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about those places and how they're different or the same as a place like St. Norbert.
Sure. Well, Cal State East Bay is a public institution. It's about 14,000 students. It's part of the 23-campus California State University system. So it is quite different than us in many ways. And that was my first institution. Prior to that, I'd worked in sort of high-tech startups. So that was my first entree into higher education, was at a medium-sized public institution. And then Menlo College is a private institution, about 700 students, and it is a business school, essentially. It's focused on all the disciplines that surround business, so marketing, finance, et cetera. And then they have a fairly robust psychology program as well. So going from Cal State with 14,000 students to Menlo with 700 students was, and public and private, was, sort of a really interesting contrast in educational environments. Some things all educational institutions, I think, have the same have in common. So, the idea of shared governance is big across higher education, and that greatly impacts the culture of educational institutions. And so, whether you're at Cal State East Bay or whether you're at St. Norbert College, that's sort of the same. You sort of have to understand that that's the culture that we're working in, and embrace it. And if you can't, we found many people who came in, especially into IT. A lot of folks will come in from outside of education,
from a corporate
environment,
very top-down, hierarchical,
and
not so in higher ed.
And some can't survive that. Some people just it's too much of a transition. Working for a state agency like the California State University system was really good because we had a lot of state structure and process that we had to follow. And so while you would think, oh, that's, all these guidelines and whatever, it also, created a real appreciation in me for, sort of how you formalize some of these programs and how you do them in a structured sort of a way that I've carried with me into some of my private institutions. But then again, at Menlo, where we're very small, you can walk into the president's office and say, hey, I want to do this, and walk out with a signed check. So, I've sort of worked in both sides of the spectrum and enjoyed both actually pretty immensely.
Well, one of the things that you've done here that really impresses me is you've changed the culture of technology here. And I'm a big believer in symbolism. I think it matters in culture. And you did a major remodel of the physical offices of that here. And I got to say, when I walk by there, I feel like I'm in Silicon Valley. I mean, just the whole feel. So talk a little bit about, first of all, what you did and why you did that.
Okay, so we had a challenge. We had a couple of challenges when I got here. One was that our IT staff were in 3 different spaces. And the first thing that I heard when I interviewed all my staff was that space was a real issue. Being physically separated was a real issue for the development of team. So we needed to bring everybody together, but as is the case on every college campus, space is at a premium and is probably the hottest political commodity that you can have. So there was no new space to be had for ITS. So we had to figure out how to bring folks together in a way that was meaningful, but bring us together in existing space. On the other side of it, I've always been a huge fan, again, coming from startups, I've been a huge fan of this idea of open concept office space, no walls, that you build sort of a whole is greater than the sum of the parts environment, where if you put 4 individual people together who are very productive, or you have 4 individual people who are very productive, they'll be pretty good and you'll get 4x return on your investment. But if you put those 4 people together in one environment, now you're getting a 6x or a 7x, right? You're getting so much more than the individual parts. So I've always been a fan of that, and I think it really can promote collaboration and communication in ways that's just not possible no matter how much you do. So our concept was no walls, that we would build this open concept office environment. And that is culturally quite unique for this community. So we had to go through a bit of convincing on our team's part in terms of just getting them to understand that this wasn't taking away. We weren't trying to make the team sort of less than other people on campus who had these private offices, and but we were actually trying to give them something that was even greater than other folks had. And speaking of symbolism, we had a wall breaking ceremony. So we literally took sledgehammers the first day of construction to our walls. Everybody on the team did, and so it was very physically and metaphorically tearing down the walls within ITS. And we have now this beautiful space. It is sort of Google-esque. It's got blues and oranges and bright colors, and it's not cubicles. It's literally no walls of any kind. Everybody is on a level playing field, so I have an open desk just like everybody else does. It's the same size, the same shape. Like, I don't have any extra privilege just because I'm the CIO. I sit out there with my teams, and we put in some amenities. We made it fun to come to work there, and the impact on collaboration has been phenomenal. I mean, almost immediately you saw people moving around, you saw people sharing spaces and moving furniture and just doing all the things that the space was designed to do.
And I understand that there's a little game room there. Is that right?
There is a game room. Shockingly, it gets used less than you would think, but we do have a game room. We have one of our, what we call huddle rooms. So we have these sort of 2 to 3 person spaces that you can duck into either for a private meeting, for a 2 or 3 person meeting, or to view a webinar, or something that you need sort of privacy to do. So one of our huddle rooms has these kind of loungy type seats, and it has a Wii in it. But what we found is really interesting is that the loungy type seats in that space get used quite a bit for webinar viewing. So we used a strategy called palette of place, and this is not my concept, this is actually Steelcase's concept. And what palette of place says is that you want different types of furniture, so you want soft seating and hard seating, you want different heights, so high tables and low tables, different configurations to support both different preferences as well as different meeting needs, different, think learning styles, different work styles. And so each one of our huddle rooms is a little bit different. Some have tables and chairs, some have soft seating, and they all get used in different ways. And the one that has the recliner seats gets used an awful lot for webinars because you're viewing something, you're working, but why not be comfortable while you're doing it as opposed to sort of in a rigid chair? So that's a fun use of that space. And we have a Wii and we have fun with it every once in a while, but actually my team works really hard, so it doesn't get as used as you'd think.
But you make a great point about seating space, and I've had the pleasure on being any number of building committees over the years, and that's something that always you wind up talking about. But in the end, you never quite nail how it is people will actually use the space or the room or the furniture or whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, over time, you kind of dial that in. But for the most part, you make your best guesses,
Yep.
and then you adjust. We have a few minutes left, and I'd like
Okay.
to ask you a question that I'm sure you've been asked a bunch of times. But IT is primarily a male-dominated environment.
Yeah.
You know, you're a chief information officer
Yeah.
in that world. I mean, do you think about that very much? And how do you think that impacts the way that you go about doing what you do? How do you think that you're different as a result of that? I'd just like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so yes, I think about it a lot. I was part of a CIO group in the Bay Area, CIOs of all the local private colleges, and I was the sole female of 12 CIOs, so it's something that is very present in what I do. In total, women CIOs across all industries make up about 9% of all CIOs, and in higher education it's slightly higher. It's somewhere between 20 and 25%, although the number seems to be declining a little bit.
Declining.
Yeah. Less women are seeing this as something that they want to do, in part because I think it's perceived as being sort of a very, high pressure, not rewarding type of career. So actually we, a number of us CIOs have gotten together and we're writing an article and doing some media pieces about how this is the best job on the planet. And these are all the reasons why you want to go into this career. I don't know that I do some things very intentionally because I'm a female in this job. So I've always been sort of a fan of jewelry and heels, but
Me too, but people look at me funny.
Yeah, I know, but I actually try to be, sort of express my femininity in the job because I want it to be very clear that I am a woman in this job, and there's nothing wrong with, you don't have to look like a Star Trek geek to do this job. There's nothing wrong with being a woman and being a CIO,
With
and
Cheeto
that's
dust
okay.
all over you, yeah.
You don't have to wear the little badge and the, so that it's okay that you can be very feminine and still be highly technical, and those are things that are not incompatible. I embrace the term geek. I'm proud to be a geek. Like, that's a cool thing to me. And then I think a lot about how we promote this as a career for women. I think that we bring so much to the table. My background's not in technology, it's in marketing. So, understanding that as long as you understand the technology in this role, this is about strategy, it's about communication, it's about relationship building, it's about, selling your vision, which is all sort of marketing, and it's not about having gone in and plugged in the network cables, for the last 20 years and things like that. But this role takes so many skills that women are quite good at. I mean, men are too, but women are very good at these types of skills and can do the job in a different way than men, and in ways that can be immensely powerful for an institution. So.
I mean, it certainly seems to be less about baud rates and that sort of thing than it does about strategy. And given the share, and you and I have talked about this, the share of spending at most organizations now on technology growing, I mean, it's like HR. It's a very strategic kind of a thing that, you need a seat at the table for your tech person because that's a lot of money will be spent, and it can be spent incorrectly and not implemented very well, and that can have real negative effects on your organization. I'm sure that there are any number of stories about organizations that had these great ideas, but because they didn't manage their technology very well.
I think we even have some, not as an institution, but we definitely have some of those stories about not managing our tech budgets very well in the past, and making some sound decisions. I mean, as a percentage of institutional budget, I don't know precisely what it is here at St. Norbert, but on average, institutions spend between about 4.5% and 6% of their institutional operating budget on technology. I mean, it's a significant chunk.
I'm surprised it's that. I would have thought it's even higher than that.
No, well, no, but that's still. I mean, that's a good amount of money, and it's and it's a very important spend. I mean, you have to really be strategic and be making decisions. Unfortunately, it's pretty hard to make decisions for 5 years down the road now, but you have to be making decisions that are forward-looking, that hopefully are always continuing to push, position you on a path that will allow you to move forward without having to sort of do rip and replace like we used to have to do in the past.
We have time for one last question.
Okay.
And it's this. What advice would you give for a young person who wants a career path like yours? What do they need to do now?
Well, I don't think there's any specific path into this career. I think that technology today is not about the back end, it's about the use of it, right? So understanding the use is really important. So whether you come up through a technology path, whether you come up through marketing or project management, it's really about understanding how people need to use and apply the technology, and being about change, embracing change, promoting change, because that's really the world that we live in. It's always evolving and changing.
Well, that's great advice. And I hope you've enjoyed our show. Until next time, I'm Kevin Quinn. Best wishes for good conversations from St. Norbert College.